We break down the top 10 Sweden and Finland-based prospects in the 2024 NHL Draft on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash, joined by Sebastian Hai, and on today's show, we'll be breaking down the top 10 Sweden and Finland-based prospects in the 2024 NHL Draft. We're going to go through them, starting with our honorable mentions. We'll work our way up to one and kind of break down the prospects and why we have this prospect over the other. We have not compared lists, so we'll be surprised by each other's lists as well. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you think about our rankings and what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get right into it here with our honorable mentions. Talk me through the guys you have and in which order here in the honorable mentions. We had 4, I think, each. So let's go through them.
Indeed, yeah. So the last player that made my cut is Topias Hynninen, who has been a pretty interesting player out of Finland so far this season. He's an intense winger who's been putting up a lot better playmaking metrics than the eye test would indicate, and he's a player that's caught our eyes on a couple occasions, and is definitely one that I'm going to track as the season progresses. Next, I've got Melvin Fernström, who has also been very, very solid. This is a player who's been mainly playing in the J20. He is a 6'1", 185-pound right shot winger, and his production at the junior level has been very impressive, with 26 goals and 54 points in 38 games. And he's been one that I've always been going back to due to the offensive production, and there's quite a bit of flash in his game at times, which can be really fun. And that said, earlier on this season, my earlier viewings of him were a lot less intriguing, which is making him a bit more of a late riser on my board. But he's a player I'm going to have one more closer look at before we have our meeting at Upper Prospects for our rankings, for our February ranking meeting. And the last 2 players are both Finnish-based, and it would be defenseman Viti Väisänen, who is a really quite intelligent player, and I've really liked his ability to use the tools that he has to a pretty decent extent. And he's not the toolsiest player. He's not the best skater in the world or overly physical by any stretch of the imagination, but the tools that he does have, he really does leverage. He's quite good at initiating contact, trying to get a low center of gravity to protect possession, especially in board battles. And I think that he's a player that also our Finnish scout Annie Karvinen is quite a big fan of. And the last one is a player that's I've had a soft spot for this entire season in Ondrej Kos, who is a really, really solid defensive winger, and has really shown internationally, especially at the Hlinka Gretzky tournament. He caught my eye there for the first time, and all my viewings since then have just kind of confirmed the takes that I got then of this being a really intelligent defensive player who has some upside as a solid possession-based winger at the NHL level. Like, he's a decent enough puck handler. He just does simple things to retain possession, get the puck into the offensive zone, and then get the puck to the higher skill players on his line so that they can create. And he often then goes towards the net front to try to create some chaos. But it's a very simple style of game, but he plays it very effectively and intelligently, which I appreciate.
For sure. That brings us to my honorable mentions. Let's start off here with Atos Koivu, who is the highest ranked of the 4 honorable mentions. He literally just missed the cut. Really creative, a half-wall scorer. He's a son of Saku Koivu, former NHLer and Montreal Canadiens legend. And yeah, I mean, he's got a decent frame at 6 foot, some weight to add at 165. He's a right shot center. And yeah, he's really good from the half wall in the power play. I think most of his production comes off the power play, but he's also got some pretty good 5-on-5 metrics. The games I've watched in Liga for him have been pretty decent as well. We've also got Andre Kosh, who you just mentioned, a Czech winger, 6 foot, 150. Another player who has weight to add and has the frame to grow into. He plays in the second division of Finnish hockey in the Mestis for Kuvi, and just a really solid, translatable player who plays really well in possession and does some pretty good things defensively. So I think he's got a decent floor and could make the NHL in a decent capacity. Lucas Pettersson is another honorable mention for me. An April birthday, 5'11", 170, plays at center. He's played some games in the second division of Swedish hockey in the Allsvenskan for MoDo. And just strikes me as a very translatable and defensively sound forward, but who also has a decent amount of skill. The work rate's there, the skating's there. There's nothing really that stands out massively, but he's good enough. He was good enough to make my honorable mentions on my top 64. And then the last player I have in my HMs would be Melvin Fernstrom, who Tony Ferrari has ranked 30th overall, which is really, really high for my liking, but I understand it. He's an offensively gifted player. He loves to shoot the puck, does it fairly well, but doesn't sacrifice playmaking either. He can give and go. He can play in space. Overall, a pretty interesting package and a player who has decent size on him as well. I think he's 6'1", 185 or 190, something like that. So, yeah, he's decently sized as well. Can play the power game. But I see some issues with his decision making and his overall vision that kind of limit him so far. And yeah, that's the reason why he hasn't been able to get any playing time in the SHL so far, despite having 54 points in 38 games in the J20. So, yeah, another player I'm keeping my eye on. But that brings us to the first two players of the top 10. Who do you have ranked at 10th overall?
I have Simon Zetter, who is a really interesting defensive centerman. I've really liked the tape that I've seen at the J20 level. The production there was very, very funny. He was at not too far off from 2 points a game in 17 J20 games this season, and was just really, really effective. But even in those viewings, the offensive game isn't what's shown brightest. There were flashes, his offensive ability, what makes it really interesting, and which has not translated to the SHL level just yet, is that when he's going at full speed, he still has his entire toolkit available to him. He processes the game quite quickly. And when he's going at higher speeds, he also has the handling skill to keep up at those higher speeds. But interestingly, at lower paces, the handling is a lot less effective. He needs that pace in order to facilitate the handling. On its own, it isn't the biggest tool. But with pace, it's quite impressive, and he's very inside driven, very focused on getting the puck to high danger areas. And I've quite appreciated his game the more I've watched. But he's also been playing some really solid minutes in the SHL in a very, very defensive focused role, and been playing that quite effectively as well. So the defensive upside with him is quite intriguing.
For sure, and that's exactly why I also have him ranked 10th overall. And
there we go.
You broke down his game fairly well. So I want to add, we're talking about a big boy here, 6'3", 187, right shot center, who can skate like that. There's value there, and we saw it with David Edstrom last year, a player who, on skill alone, probably would not have made the first round, but he's a perfect pick for a contender looking to add a surefire NHLer to the roster. That brings us to 9th overall. I have Veeti Väisänen at 9th overall. You had him in your honorable mentions. I'm a bigger fan of his overall decision-making and processing of the game. I think that we're talking about a sure bet NHLer who has the toolkit in order to add some more to his game and possibly become kind of a number 4 defenseman. And, that's why I have him ranked in kind of the 40s in my rankings. And overall, we're talking about a player who thinks the game at a really high level, and his feet and his hands and his brain are all on the same page, which is something I really look for with defensemen, especially. He's 6 foot, 163, left shot D, but I'm curious because you had him in your HM. So there's a player ranked in here that I don't have in my top 10. Who do you have at 9th?
Lucas Pettersson, who you mentioned in your honorable mentions.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a fan of my most recent viewings of his. He is a really, really high-paced player. He's very intense, and that's been true both at the SHL level and the J20. He is just constantly going and has a very high motor, and he's at his best when he's in motion. When he's in motion, he's really, really chaotic, but in a really controlled and effective way. And I've really been a fan of what he's been able to bring to the table, especially in transition when he is going at full pace. But he's another player who has been playing some really solid defensive hockey, as you mentioned. Like, he gets involved on the defensive side of the puck in all 3 zones. He's very active on the back check. He uses his high motor to really create turnovers in going back in defensive transition. And he's a player that I've come to appreciate a lot more with time, because the skill is also more effective and more frequent in my viewings as the years progressed. And he's really starting to make a big difference in those J20 games, which is what you want to see for potential top 50 players at the J20 level.
For sure. And that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get into picks 8 through 5 after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
Happy Super Bowl to all of you who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your absolute favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I'm also going to be keeping my eyes open for the Super Bowl ads, because they're always entertaining. But what I'm even more looking forward to is a same game parlay, especially because my personal favorite team is not playing in the game and I have no anxiety on the line for this game, which is always a bit relaxing. But you want to add a little bit more intrigue and excitement to the game, and a same game parlay is exactly the way to do that, by picking the team that you want to win and any other types of bets, whether it be players who score a touchdown, players who throw for interceptions, whatever you may like. So new customers who join today will get $200 in free bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's fanduel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL.
Alrighty, so here comes picks 8 through 5 in our top 10 rankings of the top Sweden and Finland-based prospects of the 2024 NHL Draft. I'm not sure if you might have the same player as me here at 8. I have Dominik Badinka at 8th overall. That might be lower than you have him.
It is.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. I know you like him a lot, and when you first mentioned him to me, you told me that he reminded you of David Reinbacher, and I immediately I went and watched him and I was like, yeah, absolutely. We're talking about a big player who moves really, really well. Really aggressive and confident defensively, but is also willing to jump into rushes, to make passes through pressure and through lanes, and has the same kind of setback to his game where the handling is kind of subpar. I'd say he's a bit more, I called him a bit more neurotic in our Discord channel when we talked about him. But yeah, I don't know where you stand on that, but yeah, I feel like it's a bit more neurotic than David Reinbacher, but in a way that kind of helps his game, doesn't it?
For sure, yeah. He's been very fun this season, but I've got him a bit higher up on my list. So
Yeah.
first, I've got Emil Hemming here at 8, which it's a very tight tier. There's a lot of potential movement here with time between like the 4 to 8 range in this list for me. But so far, Emil Hemming is a player who is, while very toolsy, he's very big. He's a strong power winger, has a wicked shot. He's quite big as well. He's listed at 6'2" and 196, and he's a right shot, and that is always quite valued in power forward mode of players. But he's been really inconsistent in my viewing so far this season, and especially at the Liga level, he's mainly been playing in a defensive role, and he's been doing that relatively well. But the minutes have been limited. The offensive opportunities have been a bit limited as well. And even when he's been getting those offensive opportunities, I haven't been seeing a level of dynamism or high-end offensive impact that I was hoping to see this season, and that was also the case at the World Juniors. But the toolkit with him is so intriguing. Like, the shot is ridiculous. He's not a playmaker by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a level of power in his game that could really facilitate that power forward goal scoring role with time. So I'm very open to him rising up my rankings in the upcoming months, but so far I still have more questions and answers with him.
For sure. And that brings us to 7. We might have the same guy. I have Leo Salin Valenius here at 7th overall. He's a left shot defenseman, 6', 176, plays for Vaxjö at their J20 level. I don't think he's seen much pro hockey this year, if any. But yeah, we're talking about a player who's fairly confident with the puck, pretty composed as well with it. There are some defensive limitations to his game. But I also have seen some really interesting flashes of him where he's able to stay back, read the play, and kind of anticipate opponents' kind of direction fairly well when defending either the rush or end zone. overall, the game's pretty kind of hit and miss. There are some moments of really interesting stuff, both offensively and defensively, but I don't think he's polished enough in either direction to make my first round. And that's why I have him ranked 39th overall here. But who do you have at 7?
Same player for
Yeah.
very similar reasons. Leo Helenius is very interesting. He's a very good skater, but one of his teammates and a defenseman on the same team, who we're going to talk about in a bit, Alfons Freij, has been a lot more impressive in my viewings of Vaxjö at the J20 level. But Helenius is really interesting because like the transition defending has been a real wild card for me this season. It has not been great in my viewings, but I could easily see that being erratic between games. But in the offensive zone with the puck on his stick, he has decent puck skills. He is a really, really solid playmaker, and he's very willing to try things. He's really, really willing to activate into the offensive zone and get pucks towards the slot. He does that at a really, really high rate, and it makes his offensive ceiling decently interesting to me, whereas the defensive side of the game is still rather neurotic, which is a nice word that you brought into the mix there with Badinka, but it certainly applies to Helenius as well, and I think even more so. But he's been very interesting, but fascinating player to watch, and the upside's interesting, but the risk is also interesting. So.
For sure, absolutely. That brings us to number 6, and that's where I have Emil Hemming. You broke down his game fairly well. I think this is a player who can disappear from games at times, and despite the size, the handedness, the willingness to drive inside pressure and kind of throw his whole body at the net when he needs to, I think that there's some severe limitations to his decision making, to his processing, and also his engagement. So those are 3 areas that, sometimes will come with time, but oftentimes you'll see them in the draft here, at least in some flashes. And I've been struggling with that with Hemming, and that's why I have him only at 34, even though he's been in the top 15 on a lot of rankings. So yeah, who do you have at 6? Is this where you have Badinka? I feel like this is a comfortable spot for him, right?
I have him 1 slot higher, so very, very close.
Wow.
But
Okay.
I do have Aaron Kiviharju here. I still have a lot of questions when it comes to Kiviharju. Like, this is a 5'10", like 165-pound left shot defenseman whose 2 massive strengths are his intelligence and his passing ability.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there was a real lack of growth in this game in like the year before his injury. He got a massive injury in October, and he's going to be out for the next month or something still at this point. But very excited to see how he does when he's back from that injury, because again, the brain is really, really exceptional, and he processes the game at a high level. But the tools have really not progressed very much in the last like 2 to 2.5 years. So while he was certainly like leagues above his age group a couple of years ago, that has not persisted with time. And I just have a lot of questions with him, because I love the style of player that he is. But in terms of NHL projection, there is a long line of players that have struggled to adapt to the NHL that play stylistically somewhat similarly. Like, I'm thinking of players like Adam Boqvist, for instance, Ville Heinola, players along those. Eric Brandstrom, like decently intelligent and creative, undersized defensemen playing pro hockey in Europe from a pretty young age, but not necessarily building on their toolkits in that time span. It makes the NHL jump a lot more difficult. So with Kiviharju, there's definitely still questions on that front.
For sure. I'm still a bit more confident with what Kiviharju brings, but yeah, at 5th overall, that's where I have Alfons Freij. I think this is a comfortable spot for him. He's a player who's extremely mobile. It's really, really good from the offensive blue line. His defensive game has also been kind of interesting in flashes. You can see elements of his game where he's, closing off a player along the side along the defensive blue line off the rush really, really well with his gap control. And yeah, I mean, he's listed at 6'1", 192. I don't know how reliable that is. It seems a bit smaller than that, but yeah, I mean, this is a player who I like the tools. I like the mobility. I think in terms of pure mobility, lateral and especially backwards mobility is probably one of the best in the draft. I like what I've seen from Freij, just not enough to put him past. I mean, I have him 28th overall. This is a pretty good group of Finnish and Swedish prospects. But yeah, who do you have at 5 to close things off?
Dominik Badinka. The time is now.
There we go.
Yes, but Badinka is a player that, as you mentioned, has really impressed me so far this season with his mobility, his composure on both sides of the puck, despite a lack of puck skills. Like, his handling is certainly subpar, but the passing ability and the ability to pull off some really impressive and composed passes under intense pressure against SHL competition has been really impressive. Like, he's 6'2", 180 pounds, decent frame, and he looks bigger than that than what he's listed as. And like, the physicality is certainly a strength. In the offensive zone, he's a little bit limited. He's not exactly going to be a high-end goal scorer or point producer at the NHL level, but he's a really effective passer and distributor of the puck more than he is a playmaker.
Yeah.
But the value really does come in the defensive zone with his ability to shut down opposing forwards and really clear the slot really well in that front area. And in transition, the ability to create consistent breakouts despite being a clearly subpar puck handler against really impressive competition has been awesome to see this season. And he's a guy that I think is going to consistently rise up the rankings between now and June.
For sure. I mean, big right shot defenseman who can move the puck. I mean, those are at a premium, right? So I think that's a very fairly likelihood. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll get into our third, where we go through the top 4 on each of our rankings after these messages from our sponsors over at Sleeper.
It's almost the halfway point of the NHL season, but you can still get in on the action with Sleeper. Sleeper is our #1 choice for your daily fantasy hockey needs here at the Locked On NHL Network. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. And all you have to do in order to do that is to correctly predict the outcome of 8 specific player stats. And you can get creative with that, whether you want to bet on the stars of the league, like the McKinnons, McDavids, and who else? Sidney Crosby is still pretty good at hockey at this point in his career. Or if it's the young studs, the ones that are currently breaking into the league, whether you want to take some riskier choices on them. The choice is yours with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
All right, so closing things off with our top 4 of the top Swedish and Finnish-based prospects of the 2024 NHL Draft. So, reminder: these aren't Swedish and Finnish nationals. We're talking about players who are playing in either Sweden or Finland in their draft year. So let's get to 4th overall. Jesse Pulkkinen. Right?
Jesse Pulkkinen.
Listen, this is the most fun I've ever had watching a prospect at any level this year. Like, he is so entertaining. 6'6", 216 pounds. He's a left shot defenseman. He's playing with Jip Jyväskylä right now in the Liga. And we have seen some really, really interesting stuff out of Pulkkinen at the World Juniors. That's where I kind of started focusing on him. I'd heard some glimpses of him, read an article on him before the World Juniors, and also our Finnish scout, Annie Karvinen, kind of flagged him to us as being like a player to watch this year. And then at the World Juniors, I was like, oh wow, this guy's fun, like really, really fun. A player this big who can move the puck this well. Like, there's so much to love there. And on top of that, the defensive game has been really solid. He's aggressive defensively as well. He doesn't hesitate to close gaps early, to throw his shoulder into players, and overall make his presence known. And the World Juniors is not by any means the only glimpse I've gotten of him. After watching him at the World Juniors, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to get more viewings of this guy. And every single clip I've seen just solidifies him as an overager in the first round for me in the 2024 NHL Draft. I have him at 27th right now. And this is the same player you have at 4th, right?
I do have him at 4th as well, but he's at 20th on my rankings, so I'm even more bullish on him than you are. Mm-hmm. I've been really impressed with Pulkkinen's ability to create consistent advantages on both ends of the ice. As you mentioned, he uses his high-end mobility and exceptional reach to shut down plays defensively at a really impressive rate. He's really aggressive. He's never afraid to use his strengths to his advantage to make life miserable for players attacking him on his side of the ice. And that's been indicative like in the World Juniors, but also at the Liga level professionally in Finland. And offensively, this is a player who, again, very mobile and uses that to really weave deception into his every action. He's also a really capable puck handler. He moves around like butter, and he can look like a 6'6" smooth skating centerman or forward sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's exceptional to see. And the combination of like defensive aggression and snarl with just like that fluidity and skill offensively is not a combination that you see often at all in draft eligible prospects, let alone D+1s that are undrafted. So he is a true unicorn, not a style of player that we've or a profile of player that we've really seen come through the draft very often recently.
Yeah.
And he's also at 4 for me.
For sure. I mean, chaos, I think, is the only
Oh,
setback to his game. He is extremely
for sure.
chaotic and kind of panicky at times, but overall, like when he's on his game, he is on. But that brings us to third overall. I have Aron Kiviharju, so like decently way above where you have him. I have him ranked 23rd overall in my rankings, and it's just I believe a lot more in the profile. Like you mentioned, he's an undersized offensive defenseman with really good brains and passing ability. I just think the breakout game is so composed with him. Like when he's got a second to evaluate, like even a half second to evaluate his options, the puck is on a teammate's stick in the neutral zone in the right position for them to break it out and make a controlled play. So just I understand that there's the concern and scare with the Bokefists and the Eric Brandstroms and those kind of molds of players that haven't worked out. But I think I mean, Kibihari just for me just feels like different gravy on that end. Like I think he's got a different skill set than them and very particular things that he does extremely well already that could help him out a lot. But who do you have at 3?
Alfons Freij.
There we go.
This is a player I am a really, really big fan of. He's currently sitting at 17th in my rankings, and that is in a tier that reaches all the way up to 8th overall. Not to say that he's going to be 8th overall on my board anytime soon, but he's in the tier, and he's currently one slot above Cole Eiserman, which is fun.
Wow.
But yeah, I know. Alfons Freij is the best playmaking defenseman that I've seen in the J20 level in the last couple seasons. He's really, really talented offensively, extraordinarily mobile, and he weaves deception to every action. Really, really strong puck handler, constantly going for lane shifts and using lateral mobility to create gaps in defensive structures and allow his forwards to attack them, while he just pops off with a great pass onto their tape in high danger areas. He's not the highest end goal scorer by any stretch of the imagination, but both his expected primary assists per 60 and slot passes per 60 in Lassi Allinen's track data are quite literally breaking the bar. And that is always fun to see. And it certainly represents the eye test as well from what I've seen so far. So Freij is a player that I'm really bullish on, and I'm going to be pushing pretty high in our next Dabba ranking meeting.
Yep, absolutely. And as of recording this, it's tomorrow. I'm super excited. But yeah, I mean, we can end things off at the top too, because I think we have it in the same order. For me, at second overall, Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, the Norwegian power forward who plays really good defensively, who has really good effort levels, and a growing offensive game. He's been showing a lot more of that goal scoring ability in the Allsvenskan as of recently. 6'1", 194, extremely translatable right shot winger. And I mean, he's one of me 2, maybe 3 players that could see hop in the NHL right away and have an impact, right?
He's been truly excellent so far at the Allsvenskan level. Especially, I mean, like the track data as well, of course, with him is exceptional, because this is a player who, despite basically not producing for the first 20 games of the season, was good and consistent top 6 minutes against professional competition in Sweden's second division. But he has really solidified his place since coming back from the World Juniors. He's been popping off at about a point a game since returning. He's been shooting a lot more, and he's a really capable goal scorer. And the playmaking ability is certainly one of the limiting factors in his game. He creates space for teammates and creates off puck assists far more than directly passing to them. Exactly. But his defensive ability is off the charts good. He's just constantly pickpocketing players on the back check. He's constantly applying pressure in the defensive zone. Really, really solid PKer already. As you mentioned, he could walk into the NHL tomorrow and be a decent enough fourth liner. And I would have no concerns of that at all. But he just plays such a professional style of hockey, really refined. And at the World Juniors, he kind of showed off his ability to care less about the defensive side of the game in order to create more offense and in order to be a bigger goal scoring threat from Norway, which to me also opened up my eyes a little bit to his ability to adapt his toolkit to individual situations and to lean into particular strengths when he needs to, and that was also quite promising. So he's been very, very solidly the second player in here for me this season among Sweden and Finnish prospects.
For sure. I mean, yeah, just there's something about his game. I think he's going to be a great complementary second liner at the NHL level. But yeah, like I said, he's really translatable. His game could translate really well to the NHL right away, off rip. But then our first and best prospect of the Swedish and Finnish-based prospects of the 2024 NHL Draft, Konsta Helenius. For me, the most mature player of this group, for sure, even though Brandsegg-Nygård is up there. I think that Helenius's decision-making, his habits, his tendencies on the ice overall are just so mature. He plays like a pro already, and that's why he's been so productive in the league. We're talking about an average size player at 5'11", 176. Started off on the top line in the World Juniors as a first line center and ended up as a second line wing, I believe, by the end of the tournament. But overall, Helenius, I think the issues with the quote unquote issues with his offensive game are a tiny bit overblown. I think that he has second line production in him for sure. But already, I mean, the defensive game, the skating, the positioning, the movement, the decisions, the habits, everything about his mental game is so tailor-made for the NHL. I think there's no doubt that he'll become a second liner. The thing is, his floor and his ceiling are more or less the same. It's second line for me. Do you agree?
I agree. I think I've been souring a little bit on the upside with Helenius with time. So he's only one slot above Michael Brandsegg-Nygård in my personal rankings. He's at 9th overall, and MBN is at 10. As you mentioned, the mental side of the game is fantastic. He thinks the game at a really, really, really impressive pace, but also finds solutions to really complex problems with seeming ease against professional competition. The production this season, of course, in Liga has been very, very strong as well. But I still have a lot of questions around the overall toolkit. I think I'm a lot less sold on the skating than you are. I still have some questions about just how effective he is from getting from A to B, because he gets from A to B decently quickly, but it's because of how well he thinks the game, not because of how he moves. And that, I think, is something that would be a bit of a wake-up call when he does make that transition to the NHL. And yeah, I the more I watch, the more questions I still have about the toolkit specifically. I think that he's a good passer, he's a decent shooter, but none of the offensive tools really jump off the page for me. So while yes, he may be a second line possession driver, I don't know just how high that goal point production upside would be. Would it be capped at 55 to 60 points maybe? I think that's the range that we're talking about with Helenius's upside at the NHL level, and that makes him a little bit more limited than other players that are in that top 10 range. So he's been dropping a little bit, but he's certainly still the top player for me in this region.
For sure. I think there's a bit more in him, but it really depends on who you play with him. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next and what you think about these rankings. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, and leave us a rate and review. It helps out the channel out a lot. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, their 24/7 YouTube channel, which keeps you updated on what's going on around sports with Super Bowl Sunday coming up and all that. It's going to be really, really interesting to keep a hold on that. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage, rankings, and a bunch of more here at Locked On NHL Prospects. This has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.